Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Albert Ostman sworn testimony. I have always followed logging and construction work. I'd worked for over 1 year on a construction job and thought a good vacation was in order. British Columbia is famous for lost gold mines. One is supposed to be at the head of Toba Inlet. Why not look for this mine and have a vacation at the same time? I took the Union steamship boat to Lund, British Columbia. From there I hired an old Indian to take me to the head of Toba Inlet. This old Indian was a very talkative old gentleman. He told me a story about a white man getting gold from a lost mine. This white man was a very heavy drinker, spent his money freely in saloons. But he had no trouble getting more money. He would be away a few days, then come back with a bag of gold. But one time he went to his mine and never came back. Some people said a Sasquatch had killed him. At that time I had never heard of Sasquatch. So, I asked what kind of an animal he called a Sasquatch. The Indian said, "They have hair all over their bodies, but they are not animals. They are people. Big people living in the mountains." My uncle saw the tracks of one that were 2 feet long. Another saw one over 8 feet tall. I told the Indian I didn't believe in their old fables about mountain giants. It might have been some thousands of years ago, but not nowadays. The Indian said, "There may not be many, but they still exist." My equipment consisted of one 30-30 Winchester rifle. I had a special homemade prospecting pick, axe on one end, and pick on the other. I had a leather case for this pick which fastened to my belt. Also, my sheath knife. A storekeeper, on the way up, sold me some matches, and my grub consisted mostly of canned stuff, except for a side of bacon, a bag of beans, prunes, macaroni, 6 packets of Rye King hardtack, 3 rolls of snuff, and milk. I had 2 boxes of shells for my rifle. We arrived at the head of the inlet at 4 p.m. The Indian had supper with me, and I told him to look out for me in about 3 weeks. I would return to the same spot when I came back. He promised to tell his friend to look out for me too. At this point Ostman hiked about, prospecting until he found an ideal campsite. He traveled great distances in the interim. I'm only including a few excerpts from his hike. About 2 p.m. I came to a flat place below a rock bluff. There was a bunch of willow in one place. I made a wooden spade and started digging for water. About a foot down I got seepings of water, so I decided to camp here for the night. Later, I found a small spring and made a small trough from cedar bark and got a small amount of water. Had my lunch and rested here till evening. I saved all the water I got from this spring, and I made it over the pass late that night. I was hungry and tired, so I camped at the first bunch of trees I came to. I had about a gallon of water, so I was good for 1 day. But I could see rough country ahead of me. I had good going and slight downhill all day. I must have made 10 miles when I came to a small spring and a big black hemlock tree. This was a lovely campsite. I spent 2 days here just resting and prospecting. The first night here I shot a small deer, buck. So I had plenty of good meat and good water. Then I came to a canyon, and on the other side was a yellow patch of grass that meant water. I was tired, and when I finally got there, I dug a pit for water and got plenty for my needs. Next day I had hard going, but I found an exceptionally good campsite. It was 2 good-sized cypress trees, growing close together and near a rock wall, good shelter for rain, with a nice spring just below these trees. I intended to make this my permanent camp. I cut lots of brush for my bed and rigged up a pole from this rock wall to hang my packsack on, and I arranged some flat rocks for my fireplace for cooking. I shot a grouse just before I came to this place. Too late to roast that tonight. I would do that tomorrow. And that's when things began to happen. I am a heavy sleeper, Not much disturbs me after I go to sleep, especially on a good bed like I had now. Next morning I noticed things had been disturbed during the night, but nothing missing that I could see. I roasted my grouse on a stick for my breakfast. About 9 a.m. I started out prospecting. I always carried my rifle with me. That night I laid my rifle under the edge of my sleeping bag. I thought a porcupine had visited me the night before and porkies like leather, so I put my shoes in the bottom of my sleeping bag. Next morning my pack sack had been emptied out. Someone had turned the sack upside down, but it was still hanging on the pole from the shoulder straps as I had hung it up. Then I noticed 1/2 pound package of prunes was missing, but my salt bag was not touched. Porkies always look for salt, so I decided it must be something else than porkies. I looked for tracks but found none. I did not think it was a bear, they always tear up and make a mess of things. I kept close to camp those days in case this visitor would come back. I intended to make a new campsite the following day, but I hated to leave this place. I had good spring water and that is hard to find. This night, I took special notice of how everything was arranged. I closed my pack sack. I did not undress, only took off my shoes and put them in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I drove my prospecting pick into one of the cypress trees so I could reach it from my bed. I also put the rifle alongside me, inside my sleeping bag. I fully intended to stay awake all night to find out who my visitor was, but I must have fallen asleep. I was awakened by something picking me up. I was half asleep and at first, I did not remember where I was. As I began to get my wits together, I remembered I was on this prospecting trip, and in my sleeping bag. It felt like I was tossed on horseback, but I could feel whoever it was walking. I tried to reason out what kind of animal this could be. I tried to get at my sheath knife, and cut my way out, but I was in an almost sitting position, and the knife was under me. The rifle was in front of me. I had a good hold of that, and had no intention to let go of it. After what seemed like an hour, I could feel we were going up a steep hill. I could feel myself rise for every step. Whatever was carrying me was breathing hard and sometimes gave a slight cough. It was very hot inside. It was lucky for me this fellow's hand was not big enough to close up the whole bag when he picked me up. There was a small opening at the top. Otherwise I would have choked to death. Then he seemed to get on level ground and was going at a trot for a long time. By this time, I had cramps in my legs, the pain was terrible. I was wishing he would get to his destination soon. I could not stand this type of transportation much longer. As near as I could guess we were about 3 hours traveling. I had no idea when he started as I was asleep when he picked me up. Finally he stopped and let me down. I heard chatter, some kind of talk I did not understand. The ground was sloping so when he let go of my sleeping bag, I rolled over. I got my head out, and got some air. I tried to straighten my legs and crawl out, but my legs were numb. I tried to massage my legs to get some life in them, and get my shoes on. I could hear now it was at least 4 of them. They were standing around me and continuously chattering. I had never heard of Sasquatch before the Indian told me about them. But I knew I was right among them. I now had circulation in my legs. I tried to stand up. I was wobbly on my feet but had a good hold of my rifle. I asked, "What you fellows warn with me?" Only some more chatter. It was getting lighter now, and I could see them quite clearly. I could make out forms of 4 people. 2 big ones and 2 little ones. They were all covered with hair and no clothes on at all. They looked like a family, old man, old lady and 2 young ones, a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl seemed to be scared of me. The old lady did not seem too pleased about what the old man dragged home. They all left me then. I had my compass and my prospecting glass on strings around my neck. I tried to reason our location, and where I was. I could see now that I was in a small valley about 8 or 10 acres, surrounded by high mountains. On the southeast side there was an opening about 8 feet wide at the bottom and about 20 feet wide at the highest point. That must be the way I came in. But how will I get out? The old man was now sitting near this opening. I moved my belongings up close to the west wall and emptied out my pack sack. My full box of shells for my rifle were missing. I only had 6 shells beside what I had in the magazine of my rifle. The boy and the girl were always watching me from behind some juniper bush. I decided there must be some water around here. The ground was leaning towards the opening in the wall. There must be water at the upper end of this valley. There is green grass and moss along the bottom. I took my rifle and the can and went looking for water. On my way back I noticed where these people were sleeping. On the east side wall of this valley was a shelf in the mountainside, with overhanging rock. The floor was covered with lots of dry moss, and they had some kind of blankets woven of narrow strips of cedar bark, packed with dry moss. They looked very practical and warm. The first day not much happened. The young fellow was coming nearer me, and seemed curious about me. My one snuff box was empty, so I rolled it towards him. When he saw it coming, he sprang up quick as a cat, and grabbed it. He went over to his sister and showed her. They found out how to open and close it. They spent a long time playing with it, then he trotted over to the old man and showed him. They had a long chatter. Next morning, I made up my mind to leave this place. I rolled up my sleeping bag, put that inside my pack sack, packed the few cans I had, swung the sack on my back, injected a shell in the barrel of my rifle and started for the opening in the wall. The old man got up, held up his hands as though he would push me back. I pointed to the opening. I wanted to go out. But he stood there pushing towards me, and said something that sounded like, "Soka soka." I backed up to about 60 feet. A 30-30 might not have much effect on this fellow. It might make him mad. I only had 6 shells, so I decided to wait. I went back to my campsite to figure out some other way to get out. If I could make friends with the young fellow or the girl, they might help me. So, I decided next time I give the young fellow my snuff box to leave a few grains of snuff in it. He might give the old man a taste of it. The young fellow went up the mountain to the east every day. He could climb better than a mountain goat. He picked some kind of grass with long sweet roots. He gave me some one day, they tasted very sweet. I gave him another snuff box with about a teaspoon of snuff in it. He tasted it, then went to the old man. He licked it with his tongue. They had a long chat. Later, I made a dipper from a milk can. I threw one over to the young fellow that was playing near my camp. He picked it up and looked at it, then he went to the old man and showed it to him. They had a long chatter. Then he came to me, pointed at the dipper, then at his sister. I could see that he wanted one for her too. I had other peas and carrots, so I made one for his sister. When I had made the dipper, I dipped it in water and drank from it. He was very pleased, almost smiled at me. He went to his sister and gave her the dipper I made for her. They did not come near me again that day. If only I could get the old man to come over to me, get him to eat a full box of snuff. That would kill him for sure, and that way kill himself. I wouldn't be guilty of murder. The young fellow might have been between 11 to 18 years old, about 7 feet tall, and might weigh about 300 pounds. His chest would be about 50 to 55 inches. He had wide jaws, narrow forehead that slanted upward, round at the back, about 4 or 5 inches higher than the forehead. The hair on their heads was about 6 inches long. The hair on the rest of their body was short and thick. The woman's hair was a bit longer on her head, and the hair on her forehead had an upward turn like some women have. They call it bangs, among women's hairdos. She was over 7 feet tall and had a goose-like walk. The man's eyeteeth were longer than the rest of the teeth, but not long enough to be called tusks. His forearms were longer than common people have, but well proportioned. His fingernails were like chisels. I have no idea what size shoes they would need. I was watching the young fellow's foot one day when he was sitting down. The big toe was longer than the rest and very strong. In mountain climbing, all he needed was footing for his big toe. They were very agile. To sit down, they turned their knees out and came straight down. To rise, they came straight up without help of their hands and arms. I will soon have to make a break for freedom. The old man was very interested in my snuff, watching me when I take a pinch of snuff. One morning after I had my breakfast, both the old man and the boy came and sat down only 10 feet away from me. I had saved up all dry branches I found, and I had some dry moss, and I used it to start a fire. I got my coffee pot boiling, and it was strong coffee too, and the aroma from boiling coffee was what brought them over. I was sitting eating hardtack with plenty of butter and sipping coffee. And it sure tasted good. I was smacking my lips pretending it was better than it really was. I set the can down that was about half full. I intended to warm it up later. I pulled out a full box of snuff, took a big chew. Before I had time to close the box, the old man reached for it. He grabbed the box and emptied it in his mouth, swallowed it in one gulp. Then he licked the box inside with his tongue. After a few minutes, his eyes began to roll over in his head. He was looking straight up. I could see he was sick. Then he grabbed my coffee can that was quite cold by this time. He emptied that in his mouth, grounds and all. That did no good. He stuck his head between his legs and rolled forwards a few times away from me. Then he began to squeal like a stuck pig. I grabbed my rifle and said to myself, "This is it. If he comes for me, I will shoot him plumb between his eyes." But he started for the spring. He wanted water. I packed my sleeping bag in the pack sack with the few cans I had left. I started for the opening in the wall, and I just made it. The old lady was right behind me. I fired one shot at the rock over her head. She turned and ran inside the wall. I must have made 3 miles in some world record time. I knew I must have 2 mountain ridges between me and saltwater, and by climbing this ridge I would have a good view of this canyon, so I could see if the Sasquatch were coming after me. As I came over the ridge, I could see Mount Baker. Then I knew I was going in the right direction. I was hungry and tired. I decided to rest here for a while. I had a good view of the mountainside, and if the old man was coming, I had the advantage because I was above him. And he'd have to stop a few 30 to 30 bullets. I ate some hardtack and I opened my last can of corned beef. I did not dare to make a fire. I rested here for 2 hours. When I got near the bottom, I shot a big blue grouse. She was sitting on a windfall, looking right at me, only 100 feet away. I shot her neck right off. I made it down to the creek at the bottom of this canyon. I felt I was safe now. I made a fire between 2 big boulders, roasted the grouse, made some coffee and opened my can of milk. My first good meal in days. I spread out my sleeping bag under a big spruce tree and went to sleep. Next morning when I woke up, I was feeling terrible. My feet were sore from dirty socks. My legs were sore. My stomach was upset from that grouse that I ate the night before. I was not sure I was going to make it up that mountain. My legs were shaking. I had to rest every 100 feet. It took me 6 hours to get to the top. After about 2 hours I got downhill to the heavy timber and sat down to rest. I could hear a motor running hard at times, then stop. I made for this sound, and after a while I hear someone holler, "Timber," and a tree go down. Now I knew I was safe. When I came up to the fellows, I guess I was a sorry sight. I came up out of the bushes and they kept staring at me. I asked where I was and how far to the nearest town. The men said, "You look like a wild man, where did you come from?" I told them I was a prospector and was lost. I had not had much to eat the last few weeks. The bucker called to his partner, "Pete, come over here a minute." Pete came over and looked at me and said, "This man is sick. We had better help him down to the landing, put him on a logging truck and send him down to the beach." I did not like to tell them I had been kidnapped by a Sasquatch, As if I had told them, they would probably have said, "He's crazy too." Pete helped me up into the truck cab, and said, "The first aid man will fix you up at the camp." The first aid man brought me to the cook and he looked me over and asked, "When did you eat last, and where did you come from?" I told him I had been lost in the wood. I ate a grouse last night and it made me sick. After the cook had given me a first-class meal, I asked the first aid man, "Can you get me a clean suit of underwear and a pair of socks? I would like a bath, too." He said, "Sure thing. You take a rest and I will fix all that." After a session in the bathroom, the first aid man gave me a shave and a hair trim, and I was back to my normal self. The bull of the woods told me I was welcome to stay for a day and rest up if I liked. I told him I accepted his hospitality as I was not feeling any too good yet. I told about my prospecting, but nothing about being kidnapped by a Sasquatch. The following day I got the Union boat back to Vancouver. That was my last prospecting trip, and my only experience with what is known as Sasquatches. I know that in 1924 there were 4 Sasquatches living, it might be only 2 now. The old man and the old lady might be dead by this time. Notes. Everyone who has met with Albert Ostman is convinced by his sincerity. Why would the father, Sasquatch, kidnap Ostman? Chris Murphy makes the point that perhaps he was kidnapped in order to provide a mate for the young female Sasquatch. Ostman himself was only a young man at the time. It is also interesting to note that not once did Ostman speak of any foul odor, which is common with Bigfoot sightings.
Years back, I drove out to Arkansas with a friend for work. Our boss was this really cool old Southern guy, and he told us, if we wanted, we could drive up early and stay at his ranch. Said there was good fishing nearby, and he had 4-wheelers and lots of beer in the fridge. Friend and I, of course, take him up on this, and we spend the first day just riding 4-wheelers. Then we got shit-faced late into the night. Next day we woke up late and decided to go fishing. By the time we got ready and ate and grabbed our stuff and went to the lake, it was fucking 6 p.m. LOL. We were both hung the fuck over, but we weren't drunk. Anyway, we were out there fishing and suddenly everything just went fucking dead quiet. I could see the water moving, but I couldn't hear it. I turned to my friend and I could tell it wasn't just me. It was like we were both afraid to speak because there wasn't any fucking sound. Right at that moment, there was this huge gust picked up. I could feel it on my skin, and it whipped through my clothes, but I couldn't hear shit, even though I could feel it. So we're both just staring at each other, spooked, when we hear this big splash. It came from over to our right and we both jumped and looked over. It wasn't Bigfoot. That's what people always think when I describe it. This thing was tall and hairy, but it was slim. Almost lanky, but with big shoulders. And it was only like 20 feet away maybe. It trudged really quickly through the water and up the bank and into the trees. Before we knew, it was gone. It happened so fast I didn't even really get a good look at it. My friend said he noticed it had big hands, but honestly all I noticed was its height and build. And that it moved fucking fast too.
A few other Anons have mentioned psychic phenomena associated with Sasquatch. So I'll share one more story I found interesting. This guy likes to go scouting about the mountains by himself a lot. One day he parked his truck and went off exploring near a stream. It was about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was a clear sky full of stars. After 20 minutes or so I start back the a quarter mile to the truck. I get there and I'm unloading gear on the passenger side seat with the door open, flashlight in my teeth, when I hear what I assume is a rock going through the trees opposite side of logging road. I'm parked perpendicular to it. I shine the light up into the treetops to see branches moving across 2 trees in an arc trajectory and hit at the base of a larger maple in line with arc. Things don't fall in arcs of their own accord. I'm highly focused at this point and intrigued. Step out into the road facing the direction of the stream and listen intently for a minute, then say aloud, "Did you throw that?" Pause. Want to throw another, or step out into the road? I'm in a state of suspense and intense awareness, listening for anything. Then I hear clear as day from the inside of the rear portion of my brain. "You have a gun." I did have a gun on me, and instantly I felt like I had breached some trust. That's all I'll say about that, because I just don't know what it was or what good speculating will do. That's what happened. It is what it is, but it was damn strange.
While the previous story mentions telepathy, the entity is never seen, so it's difficult to call it a Bigfoot encounter. Although many who encounter Bigfoot denote its habit of throwing rocks or pebbles, perhaps it was something else. In the next story, Bigfoot resembles the creature encountered by the prospector near Toba Inlet, not an advanced telepathic entity. Pop's experience. One of my clients and pretty good friends had a customer whose father-in-law was alleged to have been reduced to a neurotic child by a terrifying Sasquatch encounter. I went to speak to the son-in-law once, but the old man, Pop, was extremely hesitant to talk to me about it. I know who Pop is because he is very accomplished in a mechanical field that I'm very interested in. His overall reputation as a person is stellar. Pop loved to hunt. When he neared early retirement, he and his wife got some land in Smith County, Texas, so he could hunt often without all the disruption of traveling to different places. That satisfied wifey, and he hoped to retire in peace. Last November, he was in his very nice north-facing custom deer stand on his land, about 1,500 feet from the house, when he heard steps coming from the south. Once the steps got about 50 feet away, he barked out a trespassing warning to leave and never come back. He could not see behind him because the stand is mounted on a very large tree. The steps stopped. Then in 4 quick strides the creature appeared just to the side of the tree, slightly forward of it, and spun around and looked right at him. Pop started screaming, and this upset the creature, which screamed too and approached the stand and jumped up. It was trying to reach him, or grab the bottom of the stand and pull the whole thing down. For reference, the bottom of the stand was 15 feet off the ground. Once he got his wits a little assembled, Pop went on the defensive and leaned up to donate a .270 round to the animal. But he was shaking so bad that he dropped his gun over the rail, which threw him into a panic. The Sasquatch had already touched the bottom of the stand twice, and Pop felt like his life was in extreme danger. Survival mode kicked in hard, and he went for the only weapon he could think of: cans of iced tea. Right as he leaned down to open the cooler and snatch a can of tea, the Sasquatch backed up a few steps as though it were trying to get a running start so it could jump higher and get him out of the tree. Pop sprang up and chucked a can of tea as hard as he could at the Sasquatch and nailed it square in the upper face, which made it double over and groan loudly, hands over face. It seemed surprised and disoriented. Then Pop poured the ice and water from the cooler on it, and that caused it to wig out in grand fashion. Just as he followed by throwing the cooler at it, he missed. The Sasquatch tore off to a nearby tree line by the creek and watched him through a crook in a tree, rocking side to side. Right then Pop was hit with the realization that he had his Colt 1911 with him in his backpack. He dug the gun out of the bottom of the bag, aimed at the creature's head and fired. Nothing happened. He didn't have one up the snout. So, he then racked the slide, and right then the thing took off into the brush to the north. It crossed the creek and was shortly out of sight. Pop got off one shot and is certain he missed by a wide margin. He waited a short while and dismounted the stand to return home. He was white as a sheet and crying when he got there, and it was the first time in 32 years his wife had even seen him noticeably scared. Since then he refuses to hunt. He won't go past the tree line around the house, and will not even leave the patio after sunset. A couple of weeks ago Pop's truck broke down on the thickly wooded private dirt road leading from the FM to the house. He was stranded in the middle of a sunny afternoon about 700 feet from the house. Instead of walking home, he shut himself in the truck and kept calling people on his cell phone until he found someone to come and get him for the 20-second car ride to the house. His son-in-law received a hysterical voicemail message. Pop was practically sobbing, begging for him to come help. So the guy had to drive all the way from Nacogdoches to give a hardened combat veteran and lifelong adventurous hunter, outdoorsman a very short ride from the front yard to the front door. Pop had a .44 Magnum Colt Python on him at the time, which he always carries with him. There have been some other curious incidents, but nothing like terror in the tree stand. Hopefully I can gain access to the land. The family is urging him to at least talk to someone who knows about these animals. It's very close to my own home, and if I can gain an inroad, I'll be headed out there soon. Again, there was no instance of telepathy, even though the Sasquatch seemed to be watching Pop intently from the tree line. Another note: just as in the case of the prospector, no foul odor was mentioned. Pop heard the approaching footsteps, but assumed it was a person. There was no smell that gave it away as being anything else until he saw the creature.
Hairy man. I recently received a telephone call from a woman who I will refer to as I. When I was growing up in the 1970s, she would spend a lot of her time with her aunts who lived in the northeast suburbs of Detroit. The neighborhood had many acres of woodland, as well as old dilapidated properties that were covered in vegetation. The kids would talk about the hairy guy that spent a lot of time in one of the large abandoned buildings. I was curious, so she accompanied some of the kids into the woods. Sure enough, as they stood near the house, they would occasionally see the hairy guy look out of large broken window on the first floor. I described the face as that of a caveman with a wide flat nose. The hair was black and stringy. There had been talk in the area for many years of a huge hairy creature that would be seen roaming the neighborhood at night, but nobody ever seemed to get a good look at this thing. In the winter of 2016, I was living in her aunt's old house, which she moved into after her aunt passed. She was returning home from work when she noticed that several people were gathered around what appeared to be a multi-car accident at the end of the street. There was a lot of ice and snow on the road, so she figured that may have been the reason for the accident. But as she looked closer, the first thing she noticed was that one of the cars was literally upside down and teetering on the heavy branches of a large oak tree. Another car looked like it had been tossed into the adjacent bushes. She walked over to the scene and listened to one of the drivers, her neighbor, attempt to explain to the police officer that this big hairy man walked out in front of me. I scared it and it got real mad. I jumped out the car and ran into the house. As she watched from the window of her house, the hairy creature picked up the small car and tossed it into the oak tree. Then it pushed a parked car into a yew bush and then flipped it on its side. The police seemed to think the woman was either impaired or crazy, but I had thought back to the hairy guy in the woods. As she walked back to her house, she soon noticed a trail of huge footprints in the snow along the side leading to the woods in back. She took a few photos of the tracks, but she didn't say anything to anyone other than her nephew. I is positive that it was the same creature she saw when she was a girl. Her nephew has been setting trail cams for the past 3 years, but he has been unable to capture any photographic evidence. The abandoned houses in the woods had since been razed.
I've got a story that may be hard to believe, but I avow to you that it is completely true. I have lived on the same property in Smith Company, Virginia all my 68 years, and I have seen a lot of strange things, though I believe all were natural. But there is one thing in my woods that I have never been able to explain. The first time I saw it, I was 16 or so and squirrel hunting in the late afternoon. I was sitting on a large rock watching a den hole in a large hickory tree, when I noticed a hairy man running in the hollow below me. It was covered top to bottom with short reddish-brown hair. The hair on its head and face was very long. I think it was around 6 feet tall. It made a hell of a racket moving through brush, crashing branches and grunting up a storm. It then turned around and did the same thing on its way back. I stood up and quickly made my way home. I never said anything to my folks about what I saw. That's the last I had seen of this thing until this past October. I was dragging old tree branches down into the woods when I stumbled on a tree root. I twisted my knee badly and couldn't stand on it. I lay on the ground in pain, trying to figure out what I was going to do. Then, all of a sudden, I wake up on the porch bench. It's totally dark. I reach over and turn on the porch light. How did I get here? Then I noticed mud on my clothes and mud on the porch floor. There was also a pile of hand-sized creek pebbles on the porch table. I had seen these piles of pebbles throughout the woods for as long as I could remember. That's when I realized that the hairy man in the woods must have brought me home. I wondered if it was the same hairy man I saw when I was a boy. That's the only explanation I can come up with. I don't have any neighbors since I'm living on the ridge. Maybe I'll see it again one day.
I think I have a Bigfoot story. I didn't stick around to see WTF it was, but anyway. Have just under 50-acre hobby farm in middle of nowhere northern Wisconsin. About 1/4 of the property is swamp, wooded. Wooded area at back of property goes back to lake about half a mile through the woods. Sun is just about down but still enough light to see. Double checking making sure pastures are secure, animals all accounted for, etc. Everything normal. Start walking back to house. Hear coyotes at back of property. My WTF meter ticks slightly as usually you only hear coyotes well after dark or right before dawn. Breed Great Pyrenees as livestock guardian dogs. Generally have about 8 at any given time. They live with the sheep. Whistle for dogs and let them out of gate. If you're familiar with pyres, they're the sweetest dogs but turn into ruthless killing machines when it comes to coyotes. Dogs hear coyotes and take off towards back of property. I go in garage and grab .22 because I just keep one handy on top of some cabinets in garage. Decent .22 LR is enough to take out a coyote, so didn't really think of getting anything bigger from inside house. Path back towards woods has cornfields, now hay but did corn that year. On both sides is a slow incline up to an apex halfway to woods that is about 10 or 12 feet higher than up by house and outbuildings. Start walking down path towards woods. Suddenly all hell breaks loose back by the woods. Dogs going apeshit. Hear what I can only describe as almost a lion roar but not quite. WTF? Start running now to see what the hell is going on. Reach top of hill. Dogs are all heading my way running full speed, tails tucked. All sprint past me back towards their pen, barns. Look back towards woods. See huge fucking log come bursting through tree line. Nope the fuck back towards house at full sprint like Forrest Gump in the Vietnam scene. Quick run and open gate to let dogs back in. Go inside house. Don't want to scare kids, so try to act calm but tell wife to go upstairs with them. She can tell I'm shook as F. Grab .375 Ruger and go up to attic where I have a line of sight to top of hill and over cornfields. Watch out the window until I can't see anything anymore. Hear nothing else. See nothing else. Next morning see all dogs and animals are fine. Let out the 2 dogs that listen the best because I'm scared still. Go to check out log I saw with dogs at my side. This fucking log had to weigh about 150 pounds fully intact. Whatever fucking threw it had to have been strong as F. This was about 3 years ago. Haven't seen, heard anything weird since. I'm always respectful of the land and talk to nature while I'm out doing field work, so I'd like to think any weird shit out there knows that I'm a friend to nature.
I have seen a Bigfoot variation when hiking in Tennessee that matches identically the local legend of the Tennessee wildman, which I did not know about until after the encounter. There was kind of a rocky gorge along this trail as I was hiking with light rain at sunset. In the gorge were big rocks, and it was dark with enough room for something to be behind it. I heard the guttural ape sounds walking past it, almost like a pig frog call but different. I was spooked as the vibe changed and the forest went quiet. After passing the gorge, I decided to turn around because I wanted to go back and was thoroughly freaked out about something being near me. As I walked past the gorge again, behind one of the rocks I saw something alive and pale white. I didn't know what it was, so I kept walking closer looking at it until I made out its fucking face. Brothers, chills went down my spine as I saw this fucking thing squatted behind one of the rocks with pale skin and a red/brown mane surrounding its head. It had a wide face and nose, and it was looking at me with its head tilted downward, black beady eyes, and an evil smile. I immediately sprinted the fuck back to the trailhead and drove away. I never believed in Bigfoot until that, but let me tell you, the moment you lock eyes with this thing, you know it's something not human with great intelligence and sentience looking back at you. It didn't fit the traditional Bigfoot description, but fits the Tennessee wildman description, so I don't know if this thing is like some inbred human or like a diff type of Bigfoot, but whatever it is, it's freaky, and it's 100% real.
Be me. Live in High River, Alberta. Mountains are only an hour's drive away. Me and some friends decide to go camping out in Kananaskis, near Canmore. Call them Iron Bro, Tracker Sis, and Stoner Sis. Iron Bro is a metal worker. Big guy, close to 6'5". Easily the strongest of us. Always carries a buck knife he forged. Tracker Sis was raised in the mountains. She knows every animal and their every habit. Can find even the smallest traces of animals, and can track them like a damn expert. Stoner Sis is a great cook. Carries weed on her 24/7, but that is for her glaucoma. Me? I'm just some Métis friend. It's late September, so the leaves are just starting to change. Cold weather hasn't quite set in yet, so we won't be too cold. Take our truck out past Longview, heading towards Kananaskis country. Lots of trails right off the highway where we can hike. Allowed to camp anywhere there that we'd like. Choose a spot across the bank from the Highwood River. About 12 or so kilometers away from Canmore. Despite the proximity, it's really quiet. The tree line is still thick and continues like that all up the mountainside. Park the truck and grab all of our gear. Iron Bro and I carry the tents. Tracker Sis has our map and her hunting rifle, in case we find any animals. Grizzly bears are especially common this time of year. Stoner Sis has the food and our clothes. We trek for about 3 hours. Find a nice cliff face overlooking the highway below. Can easily see our truck. Nice and sheltered from the winds blowing through the peaks. Looking around our chosen base, we find some trees that have been bent. Large poplars, look like they're leaning against each other. 5 or 6 all in a bunch.
What are you looking at the trees for, Anon?
Iron Bro asks. He and Stoner Sis are already setting up the tents. Tell him about the way the trees are bent.
Probably just left over from the snowfall last year.
Didn't think much about it. Iron Bro seemed right. Tracker Sis wasn't convinced. Tells us she's seen stuff like this north of Red Deer, and over near Burnaby in British Columbia. Locals say it's just an odd phenomenon. Local First Nations say it's from the Sasquatch.
Sasquatch? Get real.
Stoner Sis laughs. Tracker Sis just shakes her head. She might not believe, but she respects the legends enough that she listens to the First Nations elders. I remember my grandfather talking about them. He said they were peaceful, but that you should avoid their territory if you can. We continue setting up camp. By the time we're done, it's close to dark. Gather around a bonfire and enjoy a nice quiet dinner. Lots of jokes, lots of fun. Stoner Sis offers some weed. Only Iron Bro has any. Tracker Sis wants to stay sharp in case of bears. We tie up the rest of our food high up in a tree. About 12 feet off the ground in a nearby maple. Bears won't be able to reach it. After that, we turn in for the night. Next day, get woken up by Tracker Sis.
Anon, wake up. Something tried to grab the food.
Hurry out as Iron Bro wakes up Stoner Sis. Sure enough, the tree with the food has some newly broken branches. What looks like claw marks higher up on the truck. Luckily, the bag of food is undisturbed.
Maybe it's a black bear.
Iron Bro reasons. Tracker Sis agrees and says that we should try and tie it up higher tonight. Stoner Sis and myself go for some water. There's a stream not far from our clearing. We have all the gear needed to purify our water. Beaver itch is common here. Walk to the stream and start filling our larger jug we brought with us. As we do, I notice the branches in the trees. They're all broken in the same direction. I stand up to take a closer look. All the branches are about 10 feet off the ground. They all point in the same direction, away from our campsite. Remember my grandfather's words. If you see branches broken together, the Sasquatch has marked his path. Stay the way it points, all else is their territory. Return to camp with Stoner Sis. Tell the others about the branches. Iron Bro is confused, but not worried.
They're just broken sticks, Anon.
Tracker Sis is unconvinced.
I've seen branches like that. They mean something bad.
I confirm her statement, and tell them what my grandfather told me. Iron Bro is still skeptical. Stoner Sis finally speaks up.
When we got the water, did you feel weird, Anon?
Weird how?
Like someone was watching us?
Think back on it. Looking at the branches, I remember the hair on my neck standing up. I remember the birds stopped singing. Birds only stop for a predator. Couldn't be us, they continued as we were there. Something else must have come. I involuntarily shiver.
Something was there.
Stoner Sis says again. Tracker Sis and I are now thoroughly unnerved. Iron Bro is still doubtful, but he looks more than a little nervous now. Decide to stay near camp for the night. Darkness falls again and we're around another fire. We're a little more at ease now. As we're talking, we hear a sound in the distance. Sounds like someone knocking on wood. It's echoing through the mountains, so we can't get a good idea of direction. It knocks 3 times before pausing. After a minute, the knocking happens again.
We should knock back.
Iron Bro jokes. Tracker Sis shakes her head adamantly. Says it's a bad idea. I already stood up and grabbed a large stick that was in our wood pile. I approach the tree with the food and start knocking in return. Like the first noise, I knock 3 times in return. Wait in silence. The knocking happens again. Iron Bro laughs, and Stoner Sis has a small smile as well. I knock again. The knocks return. But this time they're joined by a scream. I've heard lots of animals before, but this was entirely unfamiliar. Elk, wolves, owls, bears, humans. This sounded like none of them. It was primal, bestial. It echoed from where the knocks came from. Tracker Sis is now very scared.
I recognize that sound.
Ask her what it is. She just stands slowly.
That was a Sasquatch.
Says she heard these calls in British Columbia. None of us quite know what to say. Then we hear the call again. It sounds more agitated, like it's expecting an answer. Should I call back?
Anon, don't.
Tracker Sis says seriously.
It could be bad, very bad.
We hear another call. This one is close. 50 feet behind us in the bush we hear it. It's practically bellowing and it shakes right through us. Iron Bro is now incredibly scared, holding Stoner Sis protectively. Stoner Sis is halfway through her third joint and is unable to comprehend anything but her own fear. Tracker Sis grabs her rifle reflexively. I back away towards them, clutching my stick. We hear the call through the mountains again. Then the thing closer to us bellows back. It's gotten closer. We can now hear it coming through the underbrush. The leaves are crunching under its feet gently. Then we can smell it. It's like a deep musk. Think wet dog meets pure testosterone, mixed with a harsh skunk. None of us know what exactly to do. It sounds big and all we have is a single gun, one buck knife, our hand axe, and a stick. Whatever this is, probably wouldn't feel any of that. The movement stops and we hold our breath. It's now only 10 feet away. Just outside the light of our fire, just inside the bush. For a moment silence. Then the calling in the distance starts again. This one is longer, more purposeful. Like it was summoning something. The thing across from us bellows back again, but now it's stamping the ground. It pounds the ground with its feet and hands, before shaking the trees. We wait for the worst. Then it starts walking away. We wait and listen to see if it comes back. After about 20 minutes, we hastily retreat inside our tents. Morning couldn't come fast enough. None of us slept at all. None of us dared to. Next morning, I'm up first. I go and check out our campsite. The food is still undisturbed, but the tree it was in was thoroughly shaken. This was a large maple. The trunk had to be 2 feet in diameter. The roots looked like they were being pulled out. They were exposed and the earth was thoroughly beaten. Tracker Sis and Iron Bro join me soon after. Stoner Sis doesn't want to leave the tent. Too scared. I don't blame her. We find no traces of anything else, other than some broken branches. And a tuft of hair. We seal that away before returning to our campsite. Decide it's no longer safe to stay here. We pack up faster than I could have imagined we would and we set out back down the trail. The whole time it feels like we're being watched. Not just by one thing, but by multiple. I scan the tree line, see if I can spot anything. But I see nothing. The birds are quiet again. Once we reach out car we dive inside and drive on into Canmore. We spend the rest of our trip out there in a local motel. Anyone who asked why we left, just gets told we saw a large grizzly. They wouldn't believe us otherwise. We headed back to High River not long after. Tracker Sis is now cautious about going into the mountains again. Iron Bro and Stoner Sis have moved in together. Their wedding is in a few months. Both now strongly believe in Sasquatch. I called my grandfather when I got back. Left a message for him about what happened. He called me back immediately and sounded more scared than I could ever imagine. Says we were lucky that there was one that close and that we weren't hurt. Advises we camp in a larger group next time. Or at least bring something else to defend ourselves. We sent the hair we found to be tested. We haven't heard the results yet. All of us believe in the Sasquatch now. We all kind of want to go back. Despite how much this ordeal scared us. It would be cool to see one, you know? Sasquatch's man.
Be-in Scouts. Troops plans last trip of the summer. A canoe trip up a river and eventually reach a reservoir, a 3-day journey. Before the trip begins, one of the 2 leaders has to drop out due to family emergency. He was the only one familiar with the area, route. Other leader, not wanting to risk it, hires a local hunter as a guide. Leader is a little concerned as to why the hunter is bringing his rifle as it's not season yet, and bringing a gun on an easy canoe trip doesn't seem like an essential. Day 1 begins and ends with nothing out of the ordinary or particularly memorable. Day 2, nearing 7:30 p.m. we dock on a beach and to set up camp. The ground on the beach is weird. There are rocks all over with small indents in the soil as if thrown. Some branches are broken and arranged in neat piles. Don't see any footprints on the sand. Set up camp and begin to make dinner. We're all hollering and having a good time when suddenly from the forest we hear this wild high scream. We all stop and turn and face the darkening tree line. It's quiet and we hear no movement. Suddenly another louder scream that seems closer. Hunter gets up, grabs his rifle and flashlight and looks toward where it's coming from. Leader says get things ready in case we have to leave. The scream happens again, and a branch is snapped. We all move towards the canoes. Hunter goes into tree line. We see the light dart back and forth. It goes black for a minute and then a shot. Hunter comes tearing out, tells us to get into the canoes and get out of here. We get in and begin to paddle fast. When we're 5 minutes out, the leader asks what was that. Hunter replies, it was territorial.
3 months ago. Just got out of a bad relationship. Need to clear my head. Decide to dig out the old shotgun and head in a woods. I live in Kentucky, so there isn't a lot of full-blown forest. At least not in my specific area. The one place I know I will be able to escape modernity is Daniel Boone National Forest. Henceforth referred to as DB Forest. It's fucking huge. You can go off the beaten path and end up miles and miles away from other human beings. I spend about 2 days gathering supplies, ammunition, food, water, extra warm clothing in case the weather went to shut. The basics. I had enough stuff to stay a whole week. Load up my Jeep and get on the road. I got there at about 7 p.m. Left around 5 because I wanted a home-cooked dinner before I forced myself to live on canned chili and salted hog/rabbit/whatever. I parked and looked at the trail map to get my bearings. After taking an hour to plan a safe route into the heart of the forest, I got on the move. On the first day I hiked a good 10 miles, and about half of that was off the path. I lost a Snickers bar down a ravine and that was pretty disheartening. I made camp by a stream so if my fire started to become an issue I wouldn't have to put it out with my drinking water. I left my shelter for about 2 hours to hunt. I didn't find shit. I saw a few deer, but they were out of season. I came back to camp, sucked it up, and ate the fucking chili. This routine of hiking further and setting up camp continued without incident until about 3 days in. I was hunting again, and this time actually killed a rabbit. Rabbit was out of season at the time, but at this point I had enough of the chili. I was bringing it back to camp, and on top of a hill to my right there were some particularly tall trees. Dangling between 2 branches was a thing. I don't know what else to call it. It had 2 short legs and 2 incredibly long arms. It had hands that gripped around the entire trunk of each tree. I couldn't really see its face, all I knew at this point was that it saw me looking at it. In a single swift motion whatever it was flung itself backwards and I heard bark breaking farther back. I returned back to my camp, and once again I saw it. This time it was about 200 feet from me. Once again, it retreated in the same fashion as it did previously, except this time I saw it clinging to trees and swinging around until it was out of sight. Whatever this thing was, I wasn't getting vibes from it like it was a predator or malevolent or anything like that. It seemed to be more of a curious observer. Everywhere I went, until the 5th day, my little follower was there. It was never more than 200 feet away, and never less than 100. I had finally gotten a look at its face, and it wasn't too disturbing. It looked kind of like a monkey. The only thing that I could really pick out about its face that was odd had to be the jaw. It was permanently hanging open. Inside its mouth were about 2 rows of teeth on each jaw, but the teeth looked oddly human apart from that. Anyway, on the 5th day I woke up and began packing up camp. I looked around for my little buddy and found him missing. At this point I was going to head back home. I began the long hike back. When I reached the halfway point between campsites, I noticed my little friend on a tree. But something was different. His arms were dangling at his sides, and his legs were dangling too. I looked closer and he had been impaled on a broken-off branch. I booked it a good 400 feet before looking back again. There was another. This one was significantly larger, and it was tearing the small one apart. I watched it eat for about 30 seconds before it looked at me. Yeah, time to go. This one gave me serious vibes. It felt hateful, and definitely predatory. This time I hiked well after nightfall. Every once in a while I would hear deep hoots and howls. At around midnight, I heard crackling bark and strained branches behind me. Here is where I said fuck this shit and started running. I heard whatever was behind me gaining speed and I realized that flight wasn't working. I jumped straight to fight and started unloading into the trees behind me. Silence. I could make up something about hearing a pained howl or hearing my shots impact something other than wood, but in all honesty I heard none of that. Silence. It was long gone. My shots probably scared it away, and I'm fine with that. I didn't stop hiking until I reached my car about a day later. Came home, decided not to type it immediately, and forgot about it. I only just remembered it because I saw an article about animals being shredded out there at DB Forest.
Coyotes don't hang around when a Sasquatch makes itself known. Don't stick around to argue either. All wild animals naturally encounter Sasquatch eventually, and learn to stay away. We are just like city monkeys in India to wildlife familiar with Sasquatch. They rule the woods, they are in no danger from coyotes, bears, or cougars. Even grizzly bears get the hell away from Sasquatch, because it's not like coming upon some dopey half-drunk fisherman by a river, encountering Sasquatch. They will immediately recognize an acute sense of danger when faced with the man-like intelligence and consciousness force of a Sasquatch, combined with their all-natural mastery of the wilderness in every aspect. What a bear does to survive by instinct, without understanding anything conceptually beyond basics like any dog, is done consciously by Sasquatch, and they have every bit of intelligence and perhaps more than human wildlife enthusiasts, scientists, etc. So just imagine their grasp of life, survival, existence out there. It's pretty inspiring. Sasquatch are clearly living a superior way of life to us, and we should be humbled and ashamed of ourselves. They are living in harmony with natural existence, they do not even make fire. They don't manipulate the natural world to subdue it and use it for financial gains over others, they work with the natural world and maintain and give back. I think Sasquatch sort of regulate the areas they dwell in, like if you encounter a grizzly while hiking, it may be a Sasquatch that saves your life. Because to them, they don't want a grizzly bear, driven by blind instinct to kill you. Sasquatch recognize a value hierarchy of consciousness in other beings, and we are pretty close to them, so they help us when we mess up in their world.
The Australian Yowie Sasquatch Bigfoot Thingy. Bipedal and humanoid. 3 meters, 10 feet tall with very long arms. Shit tons of sightings, including eyewitness accounts. I know people who've seen them. We'll get to that later. People in small parts of Victoria, Southeast Australia, hear primate-like calls every day at dusk and dawn. Love shiny shit. Almost every eyewitness reported one key factor: the stink. You can always smell them before you see them. Front canine teeth hang out of their mouth. Distinctive overbite. Eyes glow. I know a man, let's call him Mick, in a central town called Jury in New South Wales, largely dirt and scrub, forest, population is less than 500, who claims to have encountered them at least twice. Once in his early teens and once a few years ago. He was exploring with a few friends when he was 12 to 15 years old and they smelt it, shortly followed by hearing its footsteps. It is very wide, flat feet, so its steps are very loud. He also claims to have heard trees cracking, which also fits the description, as they are often thought to snap any branches that get in the way when they run to keep up momentum. Sometimes even uprooting small trees. He turned to his friend, but he was gone, so he ran to catch up with him. As they caught up, his friend said that he had seen something, but didn't say much else. Mick told me that he must have seen something because he was piss scared. And he had never seen anyone run that fast. His friend never really talked about it and committed suicide in his late 30s, not because he saw a Yowie, he was a drug addict. Mick's second account was when he was in his 20s. He claims to have found a makeshift campsite in dense bushland. It had a nest bed made from shredded tarpaulins and foliage and shattered glass and rocks arranged in intricate patterns on the ground. As for killing it, I don't know. Gun.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.